I'd been married to my wife for 7 years. But the woman standing in my kitchen this morning told me I was living with an imposter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look confused. She looked certain. And then she said the one thing that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My sister stole my life. And you've been sleeping next to her. I am Daniel. I am 34. For 7 years, I thought I had a stable life. A stable marriage. A stable routine that most people would probably call boring, but in a good way. Emily and I lived in a quiet suburban home on Maple Lane. Morning coffee at 7:15 sharp. Dinner around 7. Weekend grocery runs every Saturday at 9:30. Shared jokes about the neighbor's loud dog. Familiar arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Small things that never really mattered. We were not perfect, but we were solid. At least that was what I believed. Looking back now, there were always tiny inconsistencies. Things you dismiss because you trust the person you love. She would forget the small memories we shared. Like the exact song playing during our first slow dance at that tiny bar in Portland. Or the way I took my coffee on the morning after our honeymoon. She would smile and nod when I mentioned them. But her eyes would flicker for half a second. As if searching for something she should already know. She would react differently to things she used to love. The horror movies we watched every October suddenly made her uneasy. She started closing her eyes at scenes she once quoted line for line. When I asked about it later, she simply changed the subject by refolding the laundry with unusual precision. Sometimes she would know obscure details about me that I never remembered telling her. At 23:40 one night in March, she mentioned the scar on my left knee from a childhood bike accident in exact detail, including the color of the bike. I had never spoken about that scar to anyone, not even to her. I lay awake until 4:17, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it must have slipped out years ago during some half-forgotten conversation. You do not question your wife over small contradictions. You rationalize them. Stress from her new project at work. Fatigue after long commutes. Ordinary memory gaps that everyone has. That is what I told myself, night after night. Until the day everything broke. It was a Tuesday in late October. I came home at 18:52 after a delayed train. The house was quiet in a way it never was. No soft hum of the television. No scent of dinner starting on the stove. Only the faint smell of bleach coming from the kitchen, stronger than usual. I set my keys on the counter at the usual spot. They landed with a metallic click that sounded too loud. Emily stood by the sink, wiping the same spot on the countertop over and over with a white cloth. Her movements were mechanical, almost rhythmic. She did not turn around immediately. When she finally did, her smile arrived a fraction of a second late. Her eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment they looked like someone else's. Not colder exactly. Just calibrated differently. As if she had practiced the expression in a mirror. She asked about my day without waiting for the answer, then moved to the fridge. I watched her open it and pause, staring at the contents as though the arrangement of milk and leftovers was suddenly unfamiliar. Her fingers hovered over the handle before she closed the door again without taking anything out. Later that night, at 1:03, I woke to the sound of her typing on her laptop in the living room. The blue glow leaked under the bedroom door. I stayed in bed, listening to the steady rhythm of the keys. She had never been a night owl. Not once in 7 years. I closed my eyes and tried to return to sleep, but one question kept circling in the dark. How many other things had I missed that I was never supposed to notice? It started with something small. One morning at 7:58, I sat at the kitchen table while Emily poured coffee. She placed the mug in front of me exactly as she always had. 2 sugars, splash of milk, no foam. The steam rose in the exact pattern I remembered from 1,000 other mornings. I paused with the mug halfway to my lips. The taste hit wrong. Sweet in a way I had stopped liking 2 years earlier. She stood by the counter watching me, her head tilted slightly. Her fingers tapped once against the edge of the sink before she turned away and began wiping the already clean surface. I set the mug down without finishing it. She used to tease me for changing my preferences every few months. She used to remember every small shift. This time she said nothing about it. I let it go. Later that same day at 18:12, she left her phone face up on the kitchen counter while she went to shower. The screen lit up with a single notification. I glanced at it out of habit. The message sat there in clear white text. Don't forget the meeting with the solicitor. We need to finalize the estate documents under your name before next week. I froze with my hand still on the fridge door. Estate documents. We had never discussed any estate, never mentioned solicitors, never talked about anything under my name that required legal paperwork. The shower ran upstairs for exactly 11 minutes while I stood there staring at the lock screen. When she came down at 18:37, her hair was still damp. She picked up the phone without looking at it and slipped it into her pocket. I mentioned the message later while we cleared the table. She barely paused in stacking the plates. Her explanation came out even and measured, something about work and her aunt's family legal matters. The words fit together too neatly, each one placed exactly where it should be. Her tone did not land right. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. Like a line she had practiced in the car on the way home. That was when the discomfort started. Not suspicion yet. Just a quiet wrongness that settled behind my ribs and refused to leave. I watched her that evening from the couch as she folded laundry at 21:45. Her hands moved with the same familiar rhythm, but every few minutes she would glance toward the window facing the street, as if checking for something she expected to see. She did it 4 times in 20 minutes. I said nothing. I kept my breathing steady and my face neutral while the television played some show neither of us was really watching. By 23:40, the house was dark except for the thin strip of light under the bathroom door. I lay in bed listening to her brush her teeth for longer than usual. The discomfort had grown teeth now. Small, sharp ones. If she was handling routine family legal work, why did the message mention my name specifically? And why did the thought of asking her again the next morning already feel dangerous? A week later, I came home early. The house sat silent at 16:47. No hum from the refrigerator. No distant radio. Only the low crake of floorboards under my shoes as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I heard her voice from the study, low and steady. It was not the voice I had known for 7 years. It was colder, sharper. Controlled like someone giving orders. I moved closer along the hallway, keeping my steps slow. The words drifted through the half-open door with clinical precision. She spoke about a signature being handled. About someone who had not suspected anything. Then came the sentence that stopped me cold. Once the transfer went through, everything under the inheritance would be legally hers. Inheritance. We had no inheritance talk. No wills. No distant relatives with money. I pushed the door open at 16:51. She turned instantly in the desk chair. The phone was already lowered. Her smile arrived too quickly, too calmly, reshaping her face in a single smooth motion. She greeted me as if nothing had happened. The conversation vanished, erased between one breath and the next. But I had heard every word. That night I could not sleep. At 1:12 I slipped out of bed and opened the laptop in the living room. The blue light glowed against the dark walls while I checked our shared financial records. The first crack appeared at 1:37. A dormant account had been activated 3 months earlier under a slightly different legal name. Not Emily. A near-identical variation with one letter changed in the middle. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I found another account. Then another. All tied to the same pattern. All recently activated. Small transfers moving in quiet loops between them. Someone had been systematically reorganizing our financial identity for months. The question lingered in the dark. How many more accounts waited that I had not yet seen? The next morning at 8:22, I pulled out our old photo albums from the bottom shelf. I flipped through the pages slowly, comparing newer photos from the past 2 years against what I remembered. Subtle inconsistencies stared back. Lighting angles that did not match the original timestamps. Background objects shifted by centimeters. Clothing combinations I remembered differently. A jacket that should not have been there. A watch on the wrong wrist. It felt absurd at first, until I opened the backup folder on my computer and placed one image side by side with its duplicate. They did not match, not even close. The differences were small but deliberate, like someone had edited them with care. That night at 22:15, I confronted her in the kitchen while she loaded the dishwasher. She reacted instantly. Tears came exactly when needed, sliding down her cheeks in controlled streams. She looked straight at me and said I was scaring her. Her voice trembled at all the right places. For a moment, I hesitated. She looked like my wife. She sounded like my wife. But the reaction felt learned, timed, performed rather than felt. Then came the breaking point. At 23:58 a message arrived on my phone from an unknown number. It was short and direct. If I wanted the truth about my wife, I needed to meet at Street Anselm Hospital. Do not tell her. No name. No explanation. Just the location and the instruction. I stared at the screen until the numbers on the clock changed to 01. I deleted the message, slipped the phone into my pocket, and lay back down beside her in the dark. Her breathing remained perfectly even. The hospital waited across town, its name now burned into my mind. And the only thing I knew for certain was that whatever waited there would not be simple. I had already decided I would go. The woman sitting in the hospital waiting room at 047 looked exactly like my wife. Same face, same eyes, same slight tilt of the head when she noticed me enter. She remained seated on the plastic chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice when she spoke was calm and measured. She introduced herself as Emily. My world collapsed in silence. Because at that exact moment, back on Maple Lane, the woman I had left at home was cooking dinner. I had watched her chop vegetables at 19:30 before slipping out the back door. Two identical women, same identity, same claim to the name. She did not rush the explanation. She delivered it in quiet fragments while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. There had been a twin sister, estranged for years, manipulative, exceptionally skilled at mimicry. A legal inheritance from their late father's estate waited. Millions in assets that required a verified identity match to unlock. Only one sister had been legally documented as the heir, so the other did what no one expected. She became her. Not digital theft, not simple fraud, total life replacement. She had studied the real Emily for years. Speech patterns, emotional reactions, small habits, favorite songs, the way she held a fork, the exact rhythm of her laugh. Every relationship, including mine. The woman in the chair leaned forward slightly at 1-3. Her next sentence landed like cold metal against skin. The imposter had not just stolen the inheritance. She had married me to complete the identity lock. Under the estate law's verification systems, a stable marriage strengthened the legitimacy of the claimed identity. Official documents, shared finances, witnessed routines, all of it served as living proof. I was not just a husband. I had been part of the proof for 7 years. I sat motionless while the clock on the wall clicked to 19. The woman who called herself Emily watched me without blinking, her posture perfectly composed. She mentioned how the replacement had practiced my wife's handwriting for months, replicated her signature with surgical precision, and slowly shifted small details in our shared life to make the transition seamless. Every forgotten memory, every changed preference, every rehearsed reaction, all of it had been calibration. She paused, then added one final piece before the silence stretched too long. The replacement was not working alone. There were others involved. Lawyers. A solicitor who knew the exact timing. Someone inside the bank who approved the account changes. The hospital corridor remained empty except for the distant beep of a monitor somewhere down the hall. I stared at the woman who looked exactly like the one currently waiting for me at home. Same faint scar above the left eyebrow. Same way she crossed her ankles. If this was the real Emily, then who exactly had I been sleeping beside for 7 years? And what else had the replacement already set in motion that I had not yet discovered? I left the hospital at 1:42 and drove home through empty streets. The headlights cut narrow paths in the darkness while my hand stayed steady on the wheel. When I stepped inside at 2:17, the house was still lit in the kitchen. She stood by the counter exactly where I had left her, wiping the same spot on the granite. She did not ask where I had been. She did not check the clock. She simply turned and looked at me with perfect composure. She already knew. Her voice came out calm, almost relieved, as if a long-held tension had finally eased. The mask no longer needed to hold. She told me there was no real Emily anymore. Only versions of her. She walked me into the study without hurry. At 2:29, she unlocked a drawer I had never noticed before, hidden behind a false panel in the lower cabinet. Inside lay hundreds of documents arranged in neat stacks. Identity profiles, behavioral logs, psychological mapping charts, all labeled with dates spanning 7 years. Every chart mapped me. Every log tracked our marriage. Every profile detailed her sister with timestamps and observations. It was not impersonation. It was construction. A long-term behavioral conditioning plan. She had been shaping reality around me for years. Every argument we had at 19:45 on Tuesdays. Every reconciliation that followed exactly 3 days later. Every emotional moment documented, measured, and optimized for effect. She turned one page slowly, revealing columns of my reactions scored like data points. My sleep patterns, my coffee changes, my small hesitations, all recorded. She stated that I was never supposed to question it. I was supposed to stabilize the identity. I stood there while the realization settled like ice in my veins. I was not married to a person. I was inside a system. A long-term psychological and legal experiment designed to manufacture a perfect identity claim. And I had served as the anchor. Then came the final shock. She was not merely the imposter sister. She was the engineer of both identities. Both women had been part of a larger inheritance dispute strategy. Two competing versions. One legal system. One outcome. I had been placed deliberately in the middle as the deciding variable, the living proof that would tip the scales. She closed the drawer at 2:51 with a soft click. The house returned to silence except for the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall. There was no real wife. Only competing versions designed to win legal ownership of a fortune. And every night for 7 years I had slept beside one of them, unknowingly validating her claim with every shared meal, every routine touch, every quiet evening. The question that refused to leave was simple and sharp. If both were engineered, then which version had I just spoken to at the hospital? And what role had the woman now standing 3 feet away already assigned to me for whatever came next? The confrontation happened that night at 3:12. Both women stood in the living room under the single overhead light. The real Emily. The imposter. Or maybe neither. They faced each other across the coffee table with identical postures, shoulders level, chins slightly raised. Their voices overlapped in fragments, weaving different versions of the same 7 years, different memories of our wedding day, different emotional claims about moments I thought belonged only to us. They turned toward me at the same time. One spoke first. The other answered immediately after, cutting across the silence with calm precision. The words layered over each other like two recordings played half a second apart. The room felt like it was collapsing inward. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest. Then one of them placed a stack of documents on the table with a soft slap. Legal filings already submitted. My signature sat there in digital verification logs, time-stamped and authenticated months earlier. The inheritance transfer was already in motion, accounts shifting behind invisible walls. My marriage had served as the final legal validation. I realized then that my decision no longer mattered. I was not choosing between two wives. I was only confirming a fraud that had already succeeded. One of them smiled at 3:19. A small, controlled movement at the corners of her mouth. She stated quietly that I had always been the final key. In that moment, the full shape became clear. I had never been the husband. I was the mechanism. Every shared routine, every signed form, every quiet night beside her had fed the system. My presence had anchored the identity in reality, year after year, while the documents accumulated in silence. The two women watched me now with mirrored expressions, waiting for the recognition to settle fully. The one on the left adjusted a single strand of hair behind her ear exactly the way the other had done 1,000 times. The clock on the wall ticked to 3:23. If both versions had been engineered from the start, then how many other pieces of my life had been manufactured alongside them? And what happened to the mechanism once the inheritance finally cleared? I stood motionless between them while the house remained perfectly still, as if listening for my next breath. By morning, both women were gone. I woke at 7:14 to an empty house. The bed beside me was cold and neatly made. No clothes in the closet. No toothbrush in the bathroom. No trace of the second woman from the night before. Only silence pressed against the walls. I moved through each room slowly. Kitchen counters wiped clean. Study drawer locked again with nothing left inside. The documents from the previous night had vanished along with them. No forwarding address. No suitcase marks on the carpet. No traceable financial activity on any shared account. Just silence. At 8:37, I sat at the kitchen table and examined our marriage certificate under the overhead light. Small inconsistencies stared back. A misspelled middle initial on one line. A date stamp that did not align with the courthouse records I remembered. Legally fatal details I had never noticed in 7 years of filing taxes and renewing passports together. I tried reporting it at 9:55. The police station felt too bright and too ordinary. I laid out the facts in order. 2 women. The documents. The inheritance. The officer listened, typed notes, then checked the system. His expression remained neutral. The legal case had never reached court. Everything had been structured to dissolve before any intervention was possible. From the system's standpoint, there was no contradiction left to prove. The identity framework had already been accepted. One Emily remained on all official records. One marriage. One set of signatures. One life quietly erased and replaced. I drove home at 11:20 and stood in the living room where they had faced each other hours earlier. The coffee table was empty. The clock ticked to 11:43. I opened the false panel in the study drawer again. Nothing but dust. Every argument, every routine, every night spent believing the life was solid had fed something larger. The mechanism had completed its work. The anchor was no longer needed. I checked my own bank accounts at 14:12. Small transfers had already begun moving outward through layered entities. Nothing large enough to trigger alerts. Just enough to drain slowly and cleanly. The house felt larger now, hollowed out. I sat on the edge of the bed at 1950 and stared at the empty closet. If both women had disappeared without resistance, then the inheritance must have already cleared. The fortune was gone. The identities dissolved. The legal system had closed its eyes exactly as designed. Yet one question kept returning in the quiet hours that followed. If I had been the final key, why had they left me behind intact? And what part of the plan still required me to remain alive and breathing? I used to think identity was something stable, something you could trust. But now I understand something darker. Identity isn't just who you are. It's what other people can prove you are. And if every proof is carefully constructed, then truth doesn't disappear. It gets overwritten. I don't know which version of her was real, or if either of them ever were. But I do know this. For 7 years, I wasn't living a marriage. I was living inside someone else's argument, and I was the only piece they both agreed on using.